Welcome to Time is an Illusion. And to be quite honest, lunchtime doubly so. I hope you are all not too dizzy, and I hope to finish in time for the next slot. But the idea to this talk was one day, one afternoon, when I was watching Twitter and this tweet came in. I don't know who of you knows Cal Evans. He starts every morning with a encouragement tweet, and it was this "good morning" that screamed to me at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which was like, oh, Cal, yeah, sure. But that is a thing that you have in distributed communities, distributed companies. Well, you have to realize that, and this time shift is not very easy. And I hope I can show you a few things that might make it easier in your code, and I hope I can show you also why that is such a pain. First, a bit about me. I'm Andreas. I'm working as a workflow integrator at a publishing company, and I'm doing a lot of open source stuff that is also connected with dates and times. And in all these things, yes, I made all the mistakes you can make, so you don't need to make all those mistakes I make. I hope I can show you how. Who of you knows what that is? That is the first nail on the coffin of Timezones. This is the nail, the golden nail, that connected the railway in the United States that came from the Pacific and the Atlantic. And this is the last nail that was inserted where they connected. And they had a great party. Yeah, awesome. We finally managed it to have a, I don't know, 1,000 and more kilometer railway line that connected both of the sides of the United States. And that was cool. But as soon as the railway or the train started to move, there had to be timetables made. And at that time, it was the usual case that the timetables of the train lines were made with the time of a major city. Most of the time, the starting city of the railway line. So all the times on those railways were made with New York time or San Francisco time. Given that this is such a large country, that meant that there were 4 hours offset. So the timetable said, well, this train leaves at 12 o'clock at midday in New York, and it will be at 4 o'clock in San Francisco. Not necessarily the same day, but at 4 o'clock. But that 4 o'clock would still be New York time. So it would be, wait a minute, 8 o'clock in San Francisco, which, well, didn't really go well. So in let me have a look at that. In 1883, people from the different railway companies met at one hotel and decided on a way to resolve this issue. And they decided, well, we have about 4 hours offset on this line, so let's divide that line into 4 parts, each with its own time, which is a pretty cool idea. So they can still somehow align the local time to their sunlight, and well, they have a bit of an offset of about half an hour or something like that, but that's not as bad as having 4 hours offset at one point. And then at one day, they actually sent a signal via the telegraph, which was a requirement for that. And this signal meant now it's 12 o'clock in New York. So every station along the line knew, okay, now I have to set my clock to 1 o'clock, to 2 o'clock, to 3 o'clock. And this day is also known as the day of the 2 noons. Because for most of those areas, they had to set their clock back. So it wasn't 12 anymore, but it was 11, so they had a second noon at that day. That is how time zones started. It's nothing with politics It's nothing with whatever the United States, with the government or anything. It's just been companies that had an issue and they solved it in a certain way. It didn't take long, and those time zones also only were relevant for the timetable. Everything else could do, everyone else could do whatever they wanted. Pretty soon, everyone adapted to that system because it was just convenient. And that was cool. Why is that we have this issue with this offset anyway? Well, the Earth is round. And the sun shines onto one side and the other side is dark. We as human beings have a certain habit of getting up when the sun goes up and going to sleep when the sun goes down. And usually we have noon when the sun is at its highest point at our area. As the sun moves, well, no, the Earth moves, but you know what I mean. Well, some might, no, I'm not getting into detail on that. As that moves, that means that 12 o'clock or noon also moves. And well, that doesn't work. There are ideas of getting rid of time zones. Good idea. I'm sure it will not work. We'll see later on why. There is the idea of let's all have 24 hours and we start all at the same time with noon or whatever. So that would mean, okay, some of us would be able to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and others would need to get up at 6 o'clock in the, well, evening. No, doesn't work. So the idea was, let's have a look at how this looks like. This is the current situation. We have sun in the middle, and very conveniently at the moment, night over the oceans and over Australia, but who cares about Australia? Why not just take this and divide it into 24 hours? Because a day has 24 hours, so let's divide this into 24 stripes, and each stripe has 12 o'clock at a certain time, each with 1 hour, each 1 hour after the other. And that somehow happened. It looks like this. This is a map of the time zones of the world. I'm not sure at what point, but yes, that's about how it looks like. So what is a time zone? A time zone is a stripe from the north to the south that shares the same time. One could think, well, a time zone actually is a bit more narrow. A time zone is that part of the Earth's surface, important Earth surface, that by governmental decision has the same date and time. So by now, time zones actually are a governmental decision. It's not anymore companies that define time zones, it's governments that define time zones. How they define them, it's a completely different story, but it's definitely a thing of governments. They share the same date and time. We need to do a short excursion into time coordinates. What is time? Time, most of you know GMT. GMT is Greenwich Mean Time. Greenwich Mean Time is defined, well, noon depends on the sun. So when the sun in Greenwich is at its highest point, it is 12 o'clock in the middle, midday. That gives a slight problem because then not all days are of the same length. The Earth is not completely round. It's a bit more like a, well, like a potato. And you can get an offset of up to 16 minutes between summer and winter during the day. So one day is, a day in winter is about 16, can be 16 minutes less long than during summer. Over the complete year, it equalizes itself. So that's okay, it's pretty okay for us. But at one point, physicists came into action and they said, no, we need something much more accurate. We want to have something so that we actually can count the second. 1 second has the same length as any other second as well. That's where UT came into play. That's the universal time, or Temps atomique international. Please excuse my French. It depends on atomic clocks. It counts the oscillation of a cesium atom, and I think, I don't know, 3 billion alternations count as 1 second. I don't know the exact number, it doesn't matter at all. It started in 1955, and it's completely independent from a solar orbit. 1 second has exactly the same length as any other second. Cool. But in 2015, we already had an offset, so that's 60 years after it started. We had an offset of 32 seconds against, well, noon at the sun's highest orbit. Oh, 36 seconds. That's not that much, but it adds up. And that was the point where something else has seen the light of day, which is UTC. UTC is not Universal Coordinated Time, because that should be UCT. UTC is Universal Time Coordinated. It is based on the Temps atomique international, was started in 1961, and it adds leap seconds every now and then. It's not as randomly as it might sound now. It's at defined dates, but it adds a leap second. We come to that later. And it adds leap seconds so that the offset between UTC and Greenwich Mean Time is never more than 1 second. So now we have universal time coordinated with the Greenwich Mean Time, which is pretty awesome. And UTC is what usually by now is used as the main base of time calculations. There are only a few countries that still use Greenwich Mean Time, for example Denmark, because as they signed their Time Coordination Act in 1800 and whatnot, there was no UTC, and they didn't revise that up to now. So, take care. We have time zones. What is a time zone? A time zone, for example, is Europe-Amsterdam, because it is the region that by governmental decision shares the same date and time. So we have a time zone Europe-Amsterdam. And we have the time zone abbreviation. What would be a time zone abbreviation? That would be for us here, it would be CEST, Central European Summertime. Or CET, Central European Time. But that is just an abbreviation. And it is also a collection of multiple time zones. Because CEST is not only Europe-Amsterdam, it's also Europe-Berlin, Europe-Zurich, Europe whatever you want, Europe-Paris. So that's a different story. A time zone abbreviation is something completely different than a time zone. And then there is the zone time. What? The zone time is the offset against UTC. At the moment, it's +2 hours. +2 hours is the offset to UTC that we are observing currently. Pretty complicated, isn't it? Who's still with me? Okay, so I can make it more complex. Time zones change. The thing is, a time zone is by governmental decision. Damned. I've chosen the example of Russia because every new time zone release sees a change in Russia. It seems like a sport of them. Let's change the time zone somewhere. It's for example, if you have a look, this is the time zone of 2011 at one point, September, and these are the time zones in 2014, as far as I know. So, for example, if you have a look here, don't mind the completely different colors, but for example, this part here is the same as this part here. And that's also in the same time zone. But wait a minute, what about this part here? This is here in the same time zone as this one. Over here, it's in the same time zone as these. So they just shift their time zones. And it gets even worse than that. Let's move to another time zone. Cool. But have you noticed this little bit here? You know what that is? That is the Crimean. That doesn't even belong to Russia. Well, some people say say differently. The time zone is not a representation of the political situation. It's just a convenience solution. And the most people on the Crimean currently observe the time based on Russian time. So that's why it's on here. That does not mean it's a part of Russia. It just means most of the people are just using Russian time. So let's include it here. But you have to keep that in mind. Suddenly political situations change these things. Complicated, isn't it? I can make it more complex. Summertime. Welcome to 102 years of summertime, and yes, we Germans are to blame. In 2016, that was during the First World War, people thought, well, we somehow need to make ends meet, or at least make ends lighting, and so why not shift during the summer just 1 hour off so we can have more daylight? Yes, and that was the first time daylight saving time was introduced, and so I'm really sorry about that. What is daylight saving time? Daylight saving time changes. Yeah, what does it change? Does it change the time zone? Or does it change the time zone abbreviation? Or does it change the time, the zone time? It changes the zone time and the time zone abbreviation. Because we move from CET to CEST. We move from +1 to +2. And back as well. And in PHP, you can use get transitions to actually find the transitions when the time zone, when the zone time changes. When is daylight saving time introduced, and when is it removed again? And you see 143. That's the number, the key of the array. So I skipped all the 142 before that. So that's historic information in there as well. I don't know how far it goes anyway. So if you want to know that, just use that command. Yeah. Daylight saving time? No, it's not simply just 1 hour offset. It's just a convention. It can be anything. Daylight saving time starts at different times throughout the world. The United States, for example, have changed to daylight saving time on the second weekend in April, I think. And here in Europe, we do that on the last weekend on April. So thanks for that. Daylight saving time is at different seasons on the hemisphere. Because on the southern hemisphere, they have daylight saving time when we are in winter. Oh, damned. And you need to be prepared for days with 23 or 25 hours. Because when we move to daylight saving, we have 23 hours. When we move back, we have 25 hours. Or whatever the offset is. Oh, damn. It can occur even more than once a year. For example, this year, one of the African countries actually went to daylight saving in April. They went back to standard time in June, went back to daylight saving in July, and go back to standard time in October. What the hell? Yeah, mainly Muslim people. So currently Ramadan is from June to July. So it's very convenient to have nightfall earlier at that time. And as German person, we Germans also did a very weird thing in 1947, I think it was. We moved to daylight saving in April. And then again moved to daylight saving in May. So we suddenly had +3 hours to UTC. And then in July we moved back to, well, plus 2 hours, and in October we moved back to plus 1 hour. So we extended the daylight even more. Be prepared for something like that. Yeah, to summarize the summary of the summary, time zones are political problems. Definitions. Time zones change. That is very important to remember that. And the question is not, will it change? The question is, when will it change? Time zone abbreviations cover a stripe from North Pole to South Pole. So the time zone abbreviation being, for example, CEST, it covers a whole, more or less a whole stripe. At least the zone time covers a whole stripe. The zone times are defined by the offset from UTC or GMT, whatever. And daylight saving time may add or remove time to the time zone, to the zone time. You see, even I'm getting confused. But daylight saving time does not change the time zone. We are still in Europe-Amsterdam time zone, even though we have daylight saving time at the moment. It just changes the zone time. Who's with me? Okay. Fine, because we're finished with the basics. So let's head over to the real stuff. Who of you uses, let me phrase it differently. We all use the datetime library, don't we? Thank you very much. The datetime library has a class that is datetime_zone. And that can be instantiated in different ways. You can say, give me a new datetime_zone object with +2. So you just pass in the zone time or the offset. And you get a time zone type 1. Or you pass in the CEST, the time zone abbreviation, and you get a time zone type 2. Or you pass in the actual time zone, Europe-Amsterdam, and you get a time zone type 3. What's the difference? Well, the difference is if you use Europe-Amsterdam, you can then call getLocation on that object. And it will give you the country code. It will give you the latitude and the longitude, which incidentally is about 15 meters off the speaker's hotel. And it gives you some comments if there are some available. That is pretty cool information, isn't it? What happens if I do that with the time zone abbreviation? I get nothing. Because CEST, I don't have a location for CEST. What happens if I do that with the offset? Yes, I could give you a latitude. It would be the equator, and well, somewhere in between. Doesn't make sense. So you can't get the information. You have lost information in that case. If you want to know which version of the time zone database you have at the moment, use PHP-E, grep -E, and ask for Olsen, because the time zone database is also known as the Olsen database, after a person named Olsen, or with the second name, a family name Olsen. And at the moment we have 218.5. So it is May, and we have already 5 versions of the time zone database. Okay? No, it's June, sorry, but still 5 versions of the time zone database. The time zone database currently is kept up to date by a person called Paul Eggerts. He does that on GitHub, and you can get the time zone database raw data from the IANA website. But they are not actually maintaining that, it's just they host the whole stuff. And you need to stay current with that, because it changes. How can you stay current with that? Well, of course, use the current PHP version, because with every PHP release, every bug fix release, you get the current time zone database. Derek Rathans is taking care of that, so you don't need to worry. If you can't update your PHP version for whatever reasons, I can't really think of one, but there is still the pickle package, TimezoneDB. You can also use that. That's more or less the same thing then. So you have to install that pickle package, and then you get the latest version. Or you can download it from iana.org/timezones and compile it yourself. Good luck. I wouldn't do that. Exactly. So how do we handle then datetimes in PHP? Don't ever rely on server time. Well, okay, we somehow have to rely on server time because otherwise we don't have time, but yeah, who knows whether your sysadmin actually put in the right time zone on the server? You should always use datetime with time zone information. So you can say new datetime, pass in the datetime information, and as a second parameter, you pass in the date time zone object with the correct time zone. That works in most of the cases. Oh, okay. Or you should use datetime with UTC as the time zone for server-related dates. Okay. And of course, we all use datetime immutable, don't we? Yes. So how does it look like? New date time zone, Europe, Amsterdam, yeah, sure. I'm creating a datetime immutable object here with the current date and time, and I pass in the time zone. And when I format that, I get, yes, 13:45 plus 2 hours. That's the current time, yeah, sure. And now I can translate that to something else. If I want to know how what the current time is in Phoenix, for example, I just say, hey, you know what? Set the time zone to the America Phoenix time zone. And as I use datetime immutable, I get a new one, a new date object, which overrides the other one, but hey. If I format that, I get, okay, at the moment it's 4:45 in Arizona. So very easy to get the relevant information here. But it would be far too easy, wouldn't it? Whoever tried this? Create a datetime immutable with just a string A. And you actually get something back, and it says, yeah, I did that yesterday, that's why that's not the current date. You get the, at that time, current date and the current time, and wait a minute, an offset of +1. What's that? A is a valid time zone abbreviation. It's a military time zone abbreviation, alpha. And guess what? There is also Bravo. Who of you has ever heard of Zulu time? That's it. Which letter is missing? If you try that with Juliet, it crashes. Fun with time zones. Yeah. So far, so good. In the end, that's all you need to know about how to handle time zones and time information in PHP. Cool, now we know how to handle that in PHP, but we still need to persist that stuff, don't we? So how would we store datetime information? I'd recommend to use 2 fields. 2 fields? Why 2 fields? Well, one for the local datetime or for the UTC datetime, for the actual date time, and one, a string field for the time zone. Please, the time zone, not the zone time, not the time zone abbreviation, but the time zone. What would that look like? Like this. I have create a PDO, prepare a PDO statement, insert into event, the values datetime and time zone, and then I execute that with time zone, which is the time zone, the name of the time zone, and the formatted date time information. And then I can fetch that, and I can recreate the datetime immutable object with my datetime and the time zone. So, and whoever really was paying attention would then say me, fuck you, it doesn't work. Yes, you're right. Sorry. Because I'm just seeing that at that moment. This should, of course, not be $row time zone, but a new date time object, a new date time zone, whatever. But you get the general idea. It is very important when you're using MySQL, which I come to in a bit, that you use this command. Because if you don't do that, MySQL does not know anything about time zones. this command will pass all the time zone information from your Linux system into special database tables of MySQL. And you need to redo this command every time the time zone information changes. Usually your Linux distribution should take care of that. But it's never a bad idea to actually have a look. And of course, before you do that, make sure you have the correct time zone data and not the one from 3 years ago. So, and if you have done that, and you stored your time zone or your datetime information in your time zone in 2 separate fields, you can do such elegant things like date format convert time zone. Because now you probably have a date time of, I don't know, 12:15 in Denver and 12:15 in Amsterdam and 12:15 in Istanbul. Which one is earlier? You want to know, you want to have them sorted by date, but not by date that is stored in the database, but by date converted to UTC, because that makes much more sense. And this convert time zone, convert TZ function within MySQL allows you to actually convert your date time, the date time that is stored in the datetime field, according to the time zone information that is stored in my time zone, and convert that to UTC on the fly. And then you can sort by whatever you want. You can sort by that date, by that field, and you have now your dates sorted by UTC. Not UTC at the moment where you inserted those informations, but UTC at this current information with the current time zone information, which is pretty awesome. You with me? Yes, okay. There are other databases. For example, Postgres. In Postgres, they have a field, timestamp with time zone. Please don't use that. Because it is named wrong. You know those 2 things that are hard in computers? Naming is one of them, and that is not time. The field is named timestamp with time zone, but it actually is timestamp with offset. So you would store with an offset, and then you would lose the information, what time zone am I in? What actual time zone am I in? Is this a daylight saving time or not, or what is it? The only thing you now know is it has +2. Thank you very much. So I would also advise to do the same. Use timestamp, which stores just the time, the date and time information, and use a separate field for the time zone. And here you can also do such interesting things with extract hour from at time zone, zone at time zone. Well, okay, what? Get me the hour from the time object at the time zone. This is the field that holds the time zone. And then convert that whole thing to the time zone UTC. It's the same function that we had before in MySQL. If you don't get it at that moment, I'm posting the slides later on so you can have a look at that again. Yeah, that's it. That's as easy as it is. So the main question now is, we are all web developers. How do you get the user's time zone? Is there a way? Yeah. Thank you very much. Ask them for it. That is the only valid thing. Because there is no reliable way. There would be one other reliable way. Get the current geolocation. I'll show you an example in a minute. Get the current geolocation and try to translate that into a time zone. But getting the geolocation means using the geolocation API that would require input from the user as well. So we can ask him. Wait a minute, who of you has used Moment.js? In Moment.js, you have a function actually for that. You have a function to guess the current time zone. How awesome is that? Shall we give it a try? Let's give it a try. Ah, no, I need to do it here. Guess my time zone. You see, there is no reliable way. Because I'm definitely not in Berlin at the moment. So, how can you get the time zones for your country? There is an app for that. There is a function for that. There you can ask the Timezone to list all the identifiers per country, and example for the country DE. I explicitly did that for DE, not for NL, because for NL it's not really that much fun because you get one time zone. Most of the Germans don't know that we have 2 time zones in Germany. Yes! Busingen is a small enclave within Switzerland. And they have much more in common with Switzerland than with Germany. That's about an, I don't know, 1,200 people village. But they have their own time zone, because at one point in time they said, you know what, that's pretty nice with your daylight saving time, but Switzerland doesn't have that, so piss off. So they got their own time zone. And this is a way to actually get the time zone for a current location. There is an API. There is no way to have that within PHP, because that information would just be too huge. There is the Timezone DB API, where you can put in the latitude and the longitude of your current or of the location you are looking for, and you can also say for which timestamp, and then you will get back the information. The main information here in this case is, yes, the zone name. You get also information like country code or GMT offset at the moment and whatnot. You also get the information for the current timestamp. But for example, if you have a location that is, well, where the time zone recently changed, you can give it a timestamp to know what time zone was this location in yesterday, 2 years ago, 20 years ago. Will be 10 years in future, but don't rely on that because it will change. Yes, and then there is also the possibility to get the time zones for the abbreviation. Give me all the time zones for the time zone abbreviation CEST. And you see, I just skipped a bit of it. There are 51 time zones just for CEST. That's why you shouldn't use CEST as somewhere in the database, because you lose the information which was actually which one of those 51 time zones have you been in. It's just a convenient thing, but that's just for displaying something. So please don't try to get time zone for an offset or an abbreviation, because there is no way. If you have +2, you have no idea what the actual time zone was. You don't even know whether it was daylight saving or not. Don't do funny timestamp arithmetics within the database, at least if you are required to support multiple databases, because you might not have those functionalities within the database. I mean, we've seen MySQL and Postgres can do awesome things. I'm pretty sure Oracle can do that as well, but I'm also pretty sure SQLite cannot do that. Do not store offsets in the database. You lose information. And also, well, do not rely on the, oh no, that was actually the part. Do not rely on datetime functions of the database. They might not exist. The other one, don't do funny timestamp arithmetics. Adding seconds. Who of you has ever seen a code like timestamp plus 86,400? Welcome to hell. Because just imagine we have leap seconds. That is just 1 second and it blows off everything. Don't convert datetimes to UTC. Never, ever do that. If you have logging information, for example, you have an event store, you have an event currently happening, of course you can translate that into a timestamp or to a UTC because it's happening at that moment. And you know exactly the conversion from your current local time to UTC. But what happens if you do that to a datetime information that is 5 weeks in the future? Do you know whether the time zone changes in between? So what would happen? You would convert to UTC with your current knowledge of the future time zone information. And then the time zone changes. Well, but you still have converted it and you only have UTC. You don't know anymore how to convert that correctly. So that is a bad idea. On the contrary, do use UTC for logging information, as I just said. Store datetime without the offset as a local time. And in a separate field, store the time zone name with the datetime. Or omit the time zone name if you are storing UTC for logging reasons. And I'd recommend to use Moment.js for rendering, or any other library that is out there, JavaScript library. But pass rendering onto someone else. They do that perfectly. So the main thing for you to remember, the only thing that you should take home with you is a datetime without time zone is a bit like money without currency. You don't do that. Are there any questions? Or did I just talk you into complete agony? Yeah?
Working with US customers?
Yes.
More or less touch the same object. Asking them for a time zone, they'll actually shout you back with, we're in
Mountain time, yes. Yes, well, okay, that's Americans. Or that's United States Americans. Yeah. The thing is actually, what I told you at the beginning, the thing with the time zones at the train services, that was exactly those 4 time zones. They had Pacific time, they had Mountain time, they had Central time, and they had Atlantic time. And that is still burned into their brain. But even though there are real time zones in the United States, the main thing I'd advise you is, okay, yes, it's Mountain time. Where are you located? Okay, I'm getting the geo coordinates and get that via the API. That's what I'd advise you to do in that case. Anyone else? No? Well then, I have some links also to time on Mars, because that's always what happens. Oh, what about time zones on Mars? Yes, it's covered in there. I'm prepared, you know.
How many time zones?
24 as well as on Earth. But it doesn't make any sense at the moment, because all the Mars missions are not interacting with one another. So every Mars mission has their own time zone, because for reasons of practicality, they all have the time zone of their current Earth operating system center. So most of them are in Houston. Thank you very much.